The fifth sun, a Aztec creation myth and cosmic balance. Time, darkness, before time began, before light pierced the void, before the first heartbeat echoed through creation, there was only Tal, the divine energy that permeated all existence. In this primordial darkness, the gods dwelled in eternal contemplation, knowing that the universe lay dormant, waiting for the sacred fire that would kindle the stars and set the cosmic wheels in motion. 4 times already, the gods had attempted to create lasting worlds. 4 times, their creations had crumbled into dust and memory. The first sun, ruled by mighty Tal the Tapoca, had ended when jealous Quetzalcoatl struck him from the heavens, transforming the jaguar lord into a beast that devoured the giants who walked the earth. The second sun, governed by Quetzalcoatl himself, had collapsed when Tezcatlipoca's revenge turned humans into monkeys and hurricanes tore their cities apart. The third sun, domain of Talat the Rain Lord, had burned in cosmic fire that transformed its inhabitants into birds. The fourth sun, ruled by Talat its consort Chalkiotlakia, had drowned in floods that turned humans into fish and swept away all traces of civilization. Now, in the space between destruction and creation, the gods faced a terrible truth. Creation demanded sacrifice, not the blood of mortals, which did not yet exist, but the very essence of divinity itself. For the fifth sun to rise and endure, the gods would need to offer something precious beyond measure, their own immortal lives. In the sacred city of Teotihuacan, where divine will took physical form, the gods gathered around a cosmic fire that had burned since the beginning of time. This was no ordinary flame, but the very heart of existence, the furnace where stars were born, and where matter first learned to dance with spirit. Its light cast no shadows because it was shadow and illumination both. The source from which all opposites sprang, the moment had come. The fifth sun would rise, but only if the gods possessed the courage to feed the sacred flame with their own being. In that timeless instant, as divine figures contemplated the ultimate sacrifice, the fate of all future worlds and all future mortals hung suspended like a drop of jade blood at the tip of an obsidian blade. The cosmic fire waited, the darkness watched, and in the space between heartbeats, creation held its breath. To the world before humans. To understand the magnitude of the gods' sacrifice, one must first comprehend the cosmos they sought to create. The Aztec universe was not a single realm, but a complex architecture of interconnected levels, each with its own laws, inhabitants, and purposes. At the center lay the earthly plane, Samanahuac, the one world surrounded by vast waters that stretched to the horizon. Above rose 13 heavens, each governed by different divine forces, while below yawned 9 underworlds, where the spirits of the dead journeyed toward final rest. This was not a static creation, but a living organism that required constant nourishment to survive. The gods had learned from their previous failures that permanence was an illusion. Only through continuous cycles of death and rebirth could any world endure. The fifth sun, therefore, would be built not on the dream of eternal stability, but on the acceptance of perpetual change. Time itself flowed differently in this cosmic architecture. The gods measured existence not in linear progression, but in interlocking wheels of sacred duration. The 2060-day tonal poeli tracked the sacred calendar, each day carrying its own divine essence and prophetic significance. The 3065-day Shuk poeli marked the solar year, governing agricultural cycles and seasonal ceremonies. When these two wheels aligned every 52 years, the universe reached a crucial moment of transition that required elaborate rituals to ensure the world's continued existence. Color and direction formed the basic grammar of divine order. East was red, the realm of Talat, where the sun was born each morning, and where the spirits of warriors who died in battle found their eternal home. North was black, domain of Mictlan and the land of the dead, where cold winds carried the souls of those who died natural death. West was white, where the sun died each evening, and where the spirits of women who died in childbirth guided the solar disk to its nightly rest. South was blue, the direction of Huitzilopochtli, and the realm of plenty, where maize grew tall and the seasons followed their ordained patterns. At the center of this cosmic wheel stood the world tree, its roots reaching deep into the underworld, while its branches supported the heaven. This was more than symbol, it was the literal axis around which all existence revolved, the pathway between realms that allowed gods and spirits to travel between their various domains. Every temple built by human hands would echo this cosmic architecture, with pyramids serving as earthly mountains that connected the terrestrial plane to the divine realms above. The gods who would participate in the great sacrifice each brought their own spheres of influence to the emerging creation. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, embodied conflict and change, the divine force that destroyed in order to create anew. His obsidian mirror reflected not what was but what could be, showing possibilities rather than certainties. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, represented the union of earth and sky, wisdom and power, the civilizing force that would one day bring knowledge to mortals. Tala commanded the waters that fell from heaven and flowed through underground rivers, his voice thundering from storm clouds while his tears brought life to growing plants. Talcoalt, the lady of the jade skirt, governed rivers and lakes, her flowing garments the source of all fresh water that sustained life. Sukukutzal, the flower feather, ruled over love and beauty, ensuring that creation would not be merely functional, but filled with pleasure and aesthetic delight. These divine personalities were not distant abstractions, but active participants in cosmic drama. They felt jealousy, love, anger, and compassion with the same intensity that would later characterize their human creations. Their conflicts had destroyed previous worlds not through malice, but through the inevitable friction that occurs when infinite forces interact within finite space. Yet underlying all their individual characteristics was a shared understanding: the fifth sun would succeed only if the gods could transcend their personal desires for the greater good of creation. This required a revolution in divine consciousness, a willingness to sacrifice not just their lives but their very identities for something larger than themselves. The cosmic fire that burned at Teotihuacan was therefore both ending and beginning, the funeral pyre of divine individuality and the birth crucible of a new kind of existence. Around its flames the gods would gather not as separate entities, but as facets of a single creative force willing to fragment itself so that consciousness could experience the miracle of embodied light. This was the stage set for the greatest sacrifice in cosmic history, a divine act of love so profound that it would establish the moral foundation for all future existence. The gods were about to die so that mortals might live, creating the eternal debt that would define the relationship between heaven and earth, for as long as the fifth sun burned in the sky. The sacred fire. As the divine assembly gathered around the cosmic fire at Teotihuacan, two gods stepped forward to shoulder the ultimate burden of sacrifice. The choice of who would kindle the fifth sun had been debated in the celestial councils for eons, but destiny finally revealed its chosen instruments: Tekinsekat, the proud lord of shells, and Nanahuatzin, the humble god of disease. Tekinsekat embodied everything that divine majesty could achieve. His body shimmered with the luminescence of precious shells, gathered from the deepest ocean trenches, each one reflecting starlight like captured moonbeams. His feathered cloak displayed every color that had ever existed, woven from the plumage of birds that sang only in dreams. When he spoke, his voice carried the resonance of distant thunder, commanding attention from every corner of creation. He had volunteered for the sacrifice not from humility but from pride. Surely the most magnificent of gods should birth the most glorious of sons. Beside him crouched a figure that seemed barely worthy of divine state. Nanahuatzin's body was covered with sores and pustules that wept golden ichor, his limbs twisted by sacred diseases that marked him as touched by transformation. Where Tekinsekat wore precious feathers, Nanahuatzin wrapped himself in simple reeds. Where the Shell Lord offered gifts of gold and jade, the disease god brought only thorns and bloodied papers. Yet in his ravaged features burned a light that had nothing to do with physical beauty, the radiance of absolute devotion. The cosmic fire roared before them, its flames reaching heights that dwarfed the tallest mountains, its heat so intense that even divine flesh recoiled from its proximity. This was not mere combustion but the very essence of creation itself, the furnace where matter and spirit fused into new possibilities. To throw oneself into such flames meant more than death. It meant transformation so complete that individual identity would be utterly consumed. Quetzalcoatl, serving as priest for this ultimate ritual, raised his obsidian blade and spoke the words that had been written in the cosmic codex since the first moment of existence. Who among you will illuminate the world? Who will be the sun that lights the heavens and brings warmth to the earth? His voice carried across the divine assembly, each syllable heavy with the weight of eternal consequence. Tikinsikat strode forward without hesitation, his shell-covered form catching and reflecting the firelight in brilliant cascades. I will be the sun, he declared, his voice ringing with certainty. I will burn brighter than any star, bringing glory to this new creation. But as he approached the flames, their heat struck him with overwhelming force. Despite his divine nature, despite his magnificent appearance, despite his absolute confidence, fear crept into his immortal heart. 4 times Tikinsikat advanced toward the sacred fire. 4 times he retreated, his courage failing at the crucial moment. Each failure diminished him slightly, the light in his shells growing dimmer as uncertainty clouded his divine essence. The other gods watched in growing concern. If even the most magnificent among them could not complete the sacrifice, how could the 5th sun ever rise? Then Nanahuatzin rose from his humble position on the assembly's periphery. Without words, without ceremony, without the slightest hesitation, he ran directly into the cosmic flames. His diseased body erupted in light so brilliant that the watching gods had to shield their eyes, his anguished cry of transformation echoing through every level of creation. But it was not a cry of pain, it was a song of joy, the exaltation of a spirit finally freed to fulfill its ultimate purpose. The cosmic fire consumed Nanahuatzin completely, transmuting his humble flesh into solar radiance. From the flames rose the sun itself, blazing with such pure light that it drove all darkness from the sky. But this newborn sun did not move. It hung motionless in the heavens, its light constant but static, providing illumination without the cycles of day and night that life required. Tikinsikat, shamed by Nanahuatzin's courage and desperate to reclaim his honor, finally found the strength to leap into the dying flames. His transformation created the moon, beautiful but pale, forever following the sun across the sky as a reminder of what hesitation cost. Yet even this second sacrifice did not solve the fundamental problem. Both celestial bodies remained motionless, their light steady but unchanging. To make them move across the sky, to establish the cycles that would govern earthly life, would require another sacrifice, not of 2 volunteers but of every divine being in the assembly. Isikat, the wind god, emerged as the instrument of this greater offering. His breath had the power to move the unmovable, but only if it was fed by the life force of all his fellow deities. One by one, the gods approached the still-burning cosmic fire and surrendered their immortal essence to give motion to the newly created celestial body. Tilusetlauk, whose storms had shattered previous worlds, gave his lightning-filled breath to ensure the sun would have the energy to rise each morning. Chelchalitluke offered her flowing waters, so that the moon would wax and wane like tar. Serchiketzel sacrificed her gardens of eternal spring, so that the earth would know seasons of growth and rest. Even mighty Tekali Toka, who had opposed creation in the past, willingly fed his obsidian strength to the cosmic furnace. As each god dissolved into wind and fire, their individual powers merged into a single driving force that set the heavens in motion. The sun began its daily journey across the sky, bringing light and warmth to the world below. The moon commenced its monthly cycle, governing the tides and marking the passage of sacred time. Stars wheeled in their appointed courses, each one a fragment of divine consciousness that had chosen transformation over individual survival. But the gods' sacrifice created an eternal obligation. Having given their lives to set the cosmos in motion, they required ongoing nourishment to maintain that motion. The sun needed to be fed with hearts and blood, the moon with prayers and ceremonies, the stars with smoke and incense. Without constant offerings from the creatures who would inhabit the new world, the celestial bodies would halt their movements, and the universe would collapse back into primordial darkness. This was the theological foundation that would shape every aspect of Aztec civilization, the understanding that existence was not a gift but a loan, not a right but a responsibility. Mortals owed their very lives to divine sacrifice,
and could maintain their world only by reciprocating that sacrifice through ritual, ceremony, and the willing offering of their own life essence. The cosmic fire still burned, though dimmer now, waiting for the next phase of creation to begin. For the birth of time, with the sun and moon set in motion by divine sacrifice, the framework of creation was established, but the cosmos remained empty of the consciousness that would give meaning to time itself. The gods who had dissolved into wind and fire to animate the celestial bodies found their essence scattered across multiple levels of existence. They were simultaneously dead and alive, individual and universal, present in everything yet no longer possessing distinct identity. From this paradoxical state emerged a new form of divine consciousness, one that could work with matter to create beings capable of appreciating the miracle that existence represented. This was the work of Quetzalcoatl, who had somehow managed to retain enough individual awareness to undertake the delicate task of fashioning mortal creatures who could think, feel, and most importantly, remember their debt to the gods. The creation of humanity required yet another descent into the underworld, another confrontation with death and dissolution. Quetzalcoatl journeyed to Mictlan, the realm of bones, where Mictlantecutli, the lord of the dead, hoarded the ossified remains of all previous creation. These were not merely physical bones, but the crystallized experiences of consciousness that had once existed, the accumulated wisdom and suffering of 4 destroyed worlds. "Give me the bones of the ancient ones," Quetzalcoatl demanded, his feathered form casting prismatic shadows in the gray light of Mictlan. "I will grind them with the blood of penance, and create beings who can sustain the 5th sun with their devotion." Mictlantecutli, whose skull face revealed nothing of his thoughts, posed a challenge. "Take the bones, but only if you can sound my conch shell as you circle my realm." The Death Lord handed Quetzalcoatl a shell that appeared to be solid, lacking any opening through which air might pass. This was more than a test of ingenuity. It was a trial of the fundamental relationship between spirit and matter. Quetzalcoatl called upon the worms and bees that served him, creatures so small they could penetrate the shell's minute pores and create passages for sound. As his insects worked, he began the ceremonial circuit of Mictlan, each step carefully measured to match the cosmic rhythms that governed the passage between life and death. When he raised the shell to his lips and blew, it produced a sound unlike any heard in creation, a note that contained all possible frequencies, the harmonic foundation upon which all future music would be built. Mictlantecutli had no choice but to honor his agreement, though he attempted treachery even as he granted permission. As Quetzalcoatl gathered the precious bones, the Death Lord commanded his servants to dig a pit that would trap the feathered serpent in the underworld. But Quail allies warned Quetzalcoatl of the danger, and he fled with his treasure, as Mictlan's guardians pursued him through the shadowy passages between worlds. In his haste to escape, Quetzalcoatl stumbled, and the bones scattered across the landscape of the upper world. Some fell in mountains, others in valleys, some in forests, and others in desert. This accident, which seemed to threaten the entire enterprise, actually ensured that humanity would be diverse rather than uniform, adapted to different environments, and blessed with varied gifts rather than single excellence. Working with Chihuahua, the serpent woman who understood the mysteries of birth and generation, Quetzalcoatl ground the scattered bones into fine powder. This was mixed with blood drawn from the gods' own bodies, for even in their transformed state, the divine essence retained the power to vivify matter. But not just any blood would suffice. It had to be drawn from the most precious part of the divine anatomy. Using thorns of jade and obsidian, the gods pierced their own organs of generation, letting the sacred fluid drip onto the bone meal. This was the ultimate gift, not merely life, but the capacity to create life, the ability to participate in the ongoing miracle of existence. As the divine blood mixed with the powdered bones, steam rose from the mixture like incense, carrying with it the first prayers that mortals would ever offer. From this sacred dough emerged the first humans, not perfect beings, but creatures magnificently flawed, capable of growth, learning, and most importantly, they possessed memory of the divine sacrifice that had created their world, but they also had the freedom to honor or ignore that memory. This was intentional. Forced devotion would have been worthless to gods who had freely chosen to sacrifice themselves for creation. The newly created humans opened their eyes to see the sun, created from Nanahuatzin's humble sacrifice, blazing overhead in its daily journey. They felt the wind, born from Ahecatl's transformed breath, carrying the sense of growing things across the landscape. They tasted water, flowing from Aztec essence, and found it sweet with possibility. But they also sensed something more, a cosmic fragility that required their constant attention. The sun that warmed them needed nourishment to maintain its daily journey. The rain that watered their crops fell only when received proper offerings. The very air they breathed carried the dissolved spirits of gods who had chosen extinction so that mortal consciousness could experience the wonder of embodied existence. This awareness created the first religious impulse, not fear but gratitude, not obligation but love. The earliest humans understood that their lives were not their own, but gifts from divine beings who had paid the ultimate price to make mortal experience possible. Every heartbeat was borrowed time, every breath a sacred trust, every moment of consciousness a participation in the cosmic drama that began with the gods' willingness to die for something greater than themselves. Yet this knowledge came with terrible responsibility. If humans failed to maintain the cosmic balance through proper ritual and sacrifice, the sun would halt in its course, and the universe would collapse back into primordial darkness. Every generation would inherit this burden, and this privilege, the power to sustain creation through conscious participation in the divine drama. The creation of time was thus completed, not when the celestial bodies began their movements, but when conscious beings came into existence, who could measure duration, remember the past, anticipate the future, and choose how to use the present moment. Time became not merely sequence but opportunity, the space within which mortal creatures could reciprocate the divine love that had created them. As the first humans raised their voices in the first hymns of gratitude, the cosmic fire at Nanahuatzin flared briefly, acknowledging that the great work was complete. The fifth sun had not merely risen, it had found its purpose in the hearts of beings who would spend their brief lives ensuring its continuation. The sacred flame that had consumed the gods now burned in human consciousness, where it would continue to illuminate the relationship between mortality and divinity for as long as the current age endured. This was the moment when myth became history, when divine time intersected with human time, when the eternal entered the temporal and made itself vulnerable to the choices of finite being. The gods had created not subjects, but partners, not slaves but collaborators in the ongoing work of creation. Below, the first humans began the work that would define their species, learning to live in gratitude for gifts so vast, they could never be fully repaid, yet so freely given, that the attempt to reciprocate them became the meaning of existence itself. The eternal covenant, the sacrifice that birthed the fifth sun, established more than cosmology. It created an eternal covenant between the divine and human realms that would govern Mesoamerican civilization for over 2 millennia. This was not a contract negotiated between equals, but a sacred relationship forged in divine blood, one that recognized mortal beings as essential partners in maintaining cosmic order. Unlike the theological systems that would later emerge in other parts of the world, Aztec religion never portrayed humans as fallen creatures in need of redemption. Instead, they were understood to be sacred beings, whose very existence depended on divine sacrifice, and whose survival required ongoing reciprocity with the forces that sustained the universe. Every human life was simultaneously a debt to be repaid, and a gift to be celebrated. This understanding shaped every aspect of Aztec society, from the grandest imperial ceremonies to the most intimate personal rituals. The massive temples that dominated their cities were not merely monuments to divine power but active machines for maintaining cosmic balance. Each pyramid replicated the cosmic mountain where the gods had sacrificed themselves, while the rituals performed at their summits reenacted the primal drama of divine death and renewal. The human sacrifices that shocked Spanish conquistadors and continue to disturb modern sensibilities must be understood within this theological framework. These were not acts of cruelty but of cosmic necessity, attempts to reciprocate the ultimate sacrifice that had created the world. The victims were not murdered but transformed, their beating hearts offered to nourish the sun, just as the gods had offered their own divine essence to set it in motion. Yet the covenant demanded more than ritual sacrifice. It required every human being to live consciously within the sacred cycle of giving and receiving that defined existence itself. Farmers who planted maize participated in the divine creative process. Merchants who traded across vast distances carried offerings between different sacred territories, and warriors who captured enemies provided the gods with the precious life force needed to maintain cosmic order. The calendrical systems that governed Aztec life reflected this understanding of time as sacred opportunity rather than mere duration. The interweaving of the 2060-day ritual calendar with the 365-day solar year created a complex temporal landscape where every moment carried specific divine influences and every action had cosmic significance. Individuals born on particular days inherited the characteristics of the gods who ruled those periods, while community ceremonies synchronized human activities with celestial cycles. This temporal awareness extended to their understanding of historical process itself. The Aztecs did not view the fifth sun as permanent, but as the latest in a cosmic cycle that would inevitably reach its own conclusion. This knowledge created both urgency and acceptance: urgency to fulfill their cosmic obligations while time remained, and acceptance that even their most magnificent achievements would eventually pass away like those of previous age. The Spanish conquest, beginning in 1519, seemed to validate these prophetic expectations. Many Aztec thinkers interpreted the arrival of Cortés and his men as the beginning of the fifth sun's end, a cosmic transition as inevitable as the destruction of previous worlds. This theological framework may have contributed to their initial paralysis in the face of invasion, as they struggled to determine whether resistance or acceptance was the appropriate response to what appeared to be divine judgment. Yet the conquest did not end the theological tradition that began with the god's sacrifice at Teotihuacan. Indigenous communities throughout Mexico and Central America preserved essential elements of this cosmic understanding, often blending them with Catholic symbolism to create hybrid religious traditions that honored both Jesus Christ's sacrifice and the older divine deaths that had preceded. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to illuminate the sophisticated astronomical and mathematical knowledge that supported Aztec calendrical calculation. Their accurate measurement of planetary cycles, their prediction of eclipses, and their correlation of earthly events with celestial phenomena demonstrate that their religious practices were grounded in precise observation of natural patterns rather than mere superstition. Contemporary scholars have begun to appreciate the ecological wisdom embedded in Aztec religious thought. Their understanding of cosmic balance, their emphasis on reciprocity with natural forces, and their awareness that human survival depended on maintaining harmony with larger systems, offer valuable perspectives for addressing current environmental challenges. The genetic and cultural legacy of the fifth sun creation myth persists in the millions of indigenous people who continue to speak Nahuatl and related languages throughout Mexico and Central America. Many traditional communities maintain agricultural practices and ceremonial cycles that echo the cosmic rhythms established in the original divine sacrifice, adapting ancient wisdom to contemporary circumstances while preserving essential spiritual connection. The story of the fifth sun ultimately transcends its historical and cultural origins to speak to universal human experiences of sacrifice, gratitude, and responsibility. It reminds us that existence is not a given but an achievement, not a possession but a trust, not an individual privilege but a collective obligation to something greater than ourselves. In an age when human activity threatens the stability of planetary systems, the Aztec understanding that consciousness carries responsibility for maintaining cosmic balance offers both warning and hope. Like the gods who chose to die so that life could continue, we face choices about whether our individual desires will serve larger purposes, or whether our species will join the previous four suns in the darkness of extinction. The sacred fire that consumed the gods at Teotihuacan continues to burn wherever human beings choose to sacrifice personal comfort for the continuation of life itself. In that flame, the wisdom of the fifth sun finds its eternal expression, not in temples built of stone but in hearts willing to honor the divine sacrifice that makes every moment possible.